Hope, the last thing I have. Part 5. The Crimson Ruins. Andrew trudged through the jungle, the weight of the katana comforting in his grip. The map had led him here, to a place that was hidden on the map inside of the temple. The land before him was dry, cracked, and barren, a stark contrast to the dense jungle he had left behind. Scattered across the desolate landscape were wooden structures, some broken and splintered, others eerily intact. Towers rose at odd angles, swaying as if they might collapse at any moment. Thick wooden beams jutted from the ground like the remains of a forgotten civilization. The air smelled of aged timber, dust, and something metallic, blood. And then, he saw them. Figures moved between the structures. Clad in tattered red robes, their bodies were covered in intricate markings, symbols that spiraled over their arms, faces, and chests. Some carried crude weapons, spears, blades, makeshift crossbows, while others stood atop watchtowers, gazing out into the horizon. At the heart of the settlement stood a massive wooden cage, bound with thick chains. Inside, Andrew could make out the hunched forms of people, captives, barely clinging to consciousness. His jaw tightened. He had to get them out. The plan. Andrew knelt behind a collapsed wooden beam, studying the layout. The camp was heavily guarded, but he noticed gaps in their patrols. If he moved swiftly, he could eliminate threats silently before an alarm was raised. The key points were clear. First, the watchtowers. Taking them down would remove their eyes in the sky, giving him the ability to move in the shadows without being seen. Next, the caged prisoners, trapped in the heart of the camp, surrounded by hostile guards. To free them, he would need a distraction powerful enough to scatter the enemy's attention. And finally, the main gate, the only way out of this forsaken place, heavily guarded and nearly impregnable. If he was going to lead the captives to freedom, he would have to break through it. He spotted an abandoned torch leaning against a pile of dry wood. If he could start a fire on the opposite side of the camp, it might draw attention away. Andrew's eyes swept over the camp's layout as he meticulously plotted each move in his mind. He noted the positions of the guards, the intervals between their patrols, and the fragile state of the wooden structures that formed the camp's perimeter. Every detail was a potential advantage or hazard. He mentally marked the weak points in the enemy's formation, determined that eliminating the watchtowers first would plunge the camp into disarray. In his mind, he rehearsed the swift, silent takedowns he would need to execute, knowing that any hesitation could tip the scales against him. With the route mapped out, Andrew weighed the risks of his plan. He considered the possibility that the distraction might not be enough to draw away the bulk of the defenders, or that the captives might panic and inadvertently alert the remaining guards. To counter these risks, he resolved to give clear, concise signals to the prisoners, urging them to remain calm and follow him without hesitation. He envisioned the moment when the camp would erupt in chaos, a controlled inferno ignited by a single, well-aimed torch, and how he would exploit that turmoil to reach the caged prisoners swiftly and decisively. Every action had been accounted for, and Andrew's resolve solidified as he reviewed the contingency measures in his mind. He had planned alternative escape routes and mentally rehearsed every potential confrontation, down to the last detail of hand-to-hand combat should his initial strikes falter. His pulse quickened with the adrenaline of impending battle as he gripped the katana tighter, his every sense alert and focused. In that moment, with the fate of innocent lives resting on his shoulders, Andrew steeled himself for the assault, certain that his carefully laid plan was the only way to free the captives and unravel the island's dark mysteries. He took a breath. It was time. Silent takedowns. Andrew moved like a shadow. He scaled the first watchtower, his fingers gripping the brittle wood. The sentry above, an older man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, stood oblivious. With one swift motion, Andrew seized the man's head and twisted. A sickening crack, and the sentry slumped forward. He caught the body before it could make a sound and lowered it carefully. One down. He leaped to the next tower, repeating the process. This time, he used the katana, one clean slice, and the second sentry crumpled. Now, the upper guards were gone. Time for the distraction. He grabbed the torch and hurled it at the dry pile of wood. Flames erupted, licking the air as thick smoke curled skyward. Shouts rang out. The red-robed warriors turned, some rushing toward the fire. The distraction had worked. The battle. Andrew sprinted toward the cage. One of the warriors spotted him and lunged, swinging a rusted axe. He ducked under the swing, driving the katana through the man's ribs. Another charged from the left. Andrew sidestepped, severing the man's arm at the elbow. A scream, a spurt of blood, and the fighter collapsed. More were coming. A spear whistled past him. He spun and caught the attacker's wrist, wrenching the weapon free before driving the blunt end into his throat. The warrior gurgled and fell. He reached the cage, slashing at the thick ropes holding it shut. The captives inside, pale, gaunt, but alive, stared at him with wide eyes.
Move when I say.
Andrew ordered. A war cry behind him. 3 fighters sprinted toward him, their blades raised high. Andrew stepped forward. The first one swung. He ducked low, slicing across the warrior's stomach. The second attacker lunged, and Andrew sidestepped, driving his knee into the man's ribs before delivering a killing blow. The third hesitated. Andrew took the opening, slashing upward. The katana bit deep, and the man crumpled. With a final strike, he severed the last of the cage's bindings. The prisoners stumbled out, weak but determined. After that, Andrew and others ran for the gate. The escape. The fire had spread, consuming parts of the wooden structures. More warriors had gathered, realizing the attack wasn't just a distraction. Andrew led the prisoners forward, cutting down any who stood in their path. Blood stained the dry earth. The gate loomed ahead, but 2 massive guards blocked the way, each gripping long, curved swords. Andrew exhaled. No turning back. The first warrior attacked, striking with brutal force. Andrew barely deflected the blow, the impact reverberating through his arms. He twisted, using the momentum to drive his blade into the man's leg. The warrior stumbled, and Andrew finished him with a quick thrust. The second came at him with fury. Andrew dodged, but the blade nicked his side. Pain flared, but he ignored it. He feinted left, then spun right, his katana slashing across the warrior's throat. A gurgled cry, and the man fell. The gates were open. Andrew gestured urgently, directing the captives to move through the opening just as the last one passed. A deep voice called out.
"You have no idea what you've done."
Andrew turned. A figure stood atop the burning ruins, draped in red, his face hidden beneath a hood. But the voice, it sent chills down Andrew's spine. Before he could respond, the man vanished into the smoke. But it wasn't over. Andrew didn't have time to catch his breath. The shrill cries of the red-clad warriors echoed behind them as arrows sliced the humid air, embedding into the bark and scattering foliage. Spear tips glinted in the dappled light as they were hurled with savage precision, each one missing its mark by mere inches. Andrew led the captives through a maze of gnarled trees and dense underbrush, their pounding footsteps merging with the frantic rustle of leaves. Every twist and turn in the jungle was a calculated risk, a desperate bid for survival. The group instinctively veered toward a narrow, overgrown path that Andrew recognized from his earlier reconnaissance, a hidden route that skirted the edge of a wide, churning river. The sound of water crashing over stones offered a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. With each step, the pursuers drew nearer, their curses and shouts mixing with the cacophony of battle. The rain of arrows and spears intensified, forcing the group to scramble over tangled roots and fallen logs, their escape mapped out by Andrew's sharp eyes and intimate knowledge of the terrain. In a heartbeat, the decision was made. Andrew signaled a halt, urging everyone to crouch behind a thick cluster of ferns near the riverbank. The stream roared before them, a wild, relentless force promising both peril and salvation. With precise timing, Andrew bolted, leading the captives in a mad dash toward the water. The arrows continued to hiss through the air, some splashing into the river, creating chaotic ripples that mirrored their desperate flight. Without hesitation, they plunged into the cold, churning water. The river's current seized them, dragging them downstream while the shouts of their pursuers faded into the distance. Andrew fought the relentless pull, ensuring that none were swept away by the torrent. As they emerged on the far bank, breathless and soaked, the jungle's heavy silence began to replace the turmoil of the chase, marking the first tentative steps toward freedom. The truth unveiled. Safe in the jungle, Andrew turned to the freed prisoners, his mind racing. They were battered, exhausted, but alive. One of them, a gaunt man with a deep scar across his brow, stepped forward, his gaze filled with something Andrew couldn't quite place: pity.
"You saved us,"
the man said, voice raw from thirst. Andrew nodded.
Do you know what this place is?
The man's expression darkened. He looked at the others, hesitant, as if weighing his words carefully. Then he took a slow breath and met Andrew's eyes.
"This island, it's not what you think,"
he said. Andrew felt the air grow heavy between them.
Then what is it?
The man swallowed hard.
"A prison. A prison for all of us. But you and your son, you're different."
Andrew's stomach twisted.
Michael. You saw him?
The man's face tensed.
"He's alive,"
he said quickly, but there was something in his tone that made Andrew's blood run cold.
Where is he?
Andrew demanded. The man hesitated, then finally answered.
"They took him. Not to kill him, but because they believe he's the key to escaping this place."
Andrew's breath caught.
What?
The man glanced around nervously, as if afraid of being overheard.
"The people who rule this island, they think your son is special. That he's part of some prophecy. The way he arrived, the fact that he survived the fall, they see it as a sign. They believe he's the one who will set them free."
Andrew felt his pulse hammer in his ears.
That's insane.
He said, shaking his head. The man's eyes were filled with something worse than fear. Certainty.
"It doesn't matter what you believe. They won't let him go. They're preparing for something. A ritual, maybe. A sacrifice. I don't know. But if you want your son back, you don't have much time."
Andrew clenched his fists, his body tense with rage and desperation. Michael was alive, but for how much longer? He had to act. Now. He turned to the others.
Where did they take him?
The man pointed toward the horizon. To be continued.